What would you do if a judge stopped an entire courtroom for one mother everyone assumed was just making excuses? Drop a comment telling us the first thing you would think, because the moment Judge Frank Caprio looked down from that bench, everything changed. By the end of this story, a woman who walked in ready to be crushed by the system would walk out with something far more powerful than mercy. And trust me, the most shocking part wasn't the fine. It was what Judge Caprio did when the truth finally surfaced. At 9:14 on a gray Tuesday morning, inside Providence Municipal Court at 325 Washington Street, the air felt stale enough to chew. Old wood, cheap coffee, wet coats from a misting Rhode Island drizzle. The digital docket board blinked red case numbers one after another while people waited with folded arms and tired faces. Hit that subscribe button if you believe the smallest courtroom moments can reveal the biggest truths, because this one would become the kind of clip people replay over and over just to watch the room react. The bailiff, Ron Hardy, had already called 17 cases that morning: parking tickets, snow ban violations, registration problems, the usual stream of people shuffling to the front, mumbling explanations, asking for extensions. Judge Caprio sat exactly as viewers knew him: calm shoulders, gentle eyes, hands folded loosely, not performing authority but carrying it like second nature. He listened more than he spoke. And that mattered, because the woman about to step forward had spent the last 3 years in a world where nobody listened until something broke. Her name was Alicia Rivera. She was 32 years old, 5'4", Puerto Rican, born in Providence, raised off Broad Street, and running almost entirely on caffeine, pride, and a level of exhaustion that had long ago become permanent. She wore black Skechers with the soles worn smooth at the heels, navy scrubs under a faded Old Navy cardigan, and a silver chain so thin it looked like it might snap if life tugged any harder. In one hand she carried a manila envelope bent at the corners. In the other she gripped the keys to a 2009 Toyota Corolla with 186,000 miles, a cracked side mirror, and a back seat full of booster seats, grocery bags, and one stuffed panda missing an eye. Like this video, if you believe a person's worst paperwork day should never be mistaken for the whole truth about their life. Because when Alicia's case number lit up, most people in that room thought they already knew exactly who she was. Another driver with unpaid tickets, another person gaming sympathy, another story that wouldn't hold up under 5 questions. They were wrong. Case 23 MC 11847, Ron called. Alicia Rivera. She walked forward fast, chin high, shoulders tight, as if she had rehearsed being unbreakable on the ride over. Her dark hair was pulled into a rough bun with a blue elastic. There was a faint grease stain on her left sleeve, probably from the Corolla's stubborn driver's side door hinge. Her eyes were sharp but not rested. There are people who look tired. Alicia looked cornered. She stopped at the microphone. "Morning." Judge Caprio looked down kindly. "Good morning, Miss Rivera." The clerk, Maria Lombardi, slid the file toward him. Daniel Keene, the city prosecutor, adjusted his glasses and glanced over the citations. 4 parking violations, 1 hydrant violation, 1 expired meter, 1 overtime zone, 1 failure to appear, 1 reinstatement fee pending. Total balance with penalties and administrative costs, $846. A few people in the gallery whispered. $846 in municipal court was enough to make the room assume a pattern. A bad one. Share this with someone who needs to see that first impressions can be dangerously lazy. Because what happened next started with exactly that kind of judgment. Judge Caprio read silently for a second, then looked up. "Miss Rivera, you have several matters before the court this morning. Tell me what happened." Alicia let out a breath that sounded more like a warning than relief. "What happened is I work 2 jobs. I've got 2 kids, and every time I turn around this city wants another piece of me." The room got quieter. Judge Caprio's voice stayed even. "I understand you're frustrated, but let's take it one piece at a time. I'm not asking for pity, Your Honor. Nobody said you were. I'm just saying let's not do the whole lecture thing. If I owe it, I owe it. If I can't pay it, then I can't pay it. A couple people in the back exchanged looks. That line landed hard. It sounded rude. It sounded dismissive. It sounded, to people who didn't know what humiliation does to a voice, almost arrogant. Judge Caprio didn't flinch. Miss Rivera, the lecture is free. The fines are not. So if I were you, I'd let me ask a few questions. A few soft laughs broke the tension. Even Alicia almost smiled, but she caught herself before it fully happened. "And what do you do for work?" he asked. "Certified nursing assistant at Elmhurst Rehabilitation on nights, and 3 afternoons a week I clean offices over on Westminster." "What time did you get off work this morning?" 7:10. "And you came straight here?" "Dropped my son at school, my daughter with my neighbor, then here." Judge Caprio glanced at the clock. 9:18 a.m. "So you haven't slept?" "Not really." The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the city notes repeated non-payment over several months and a failure to appear notice issued in July." Alicia's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I know what it says." Judge Caprio looked back at her. "Do you always speak to people before they finish helping you?" She stared at him, long enough for everyone to feel it. Then she said, "No, sir." That was the first crack, tiny but real. The first citation was from May 14, 2023, 6:42 p.m., parked within 15 feet of a fire hydrant on Broad Street near a Walgreens pharmacy. The second was June 2, 8:11 a.m., overtime in a 15-minute loading zone on Eddy Street. The third was June 28, 11:56 p.m., meter expired near Richmond Street. The fourth was July 7, failure to appear on the original notice. The fifth, the one pushing everything into suspension territory, was August 3, no standing zone outside an apartment building on Potters Avenue. On paper it looked ugly. On paper it looked careless. On paper, Alicia Rivera looked exactly like the kind of person bureaucracy knows how to punish. Then Judge Caprio saw the dates a little more closely, and his fingers stopped moving over the file. If you believe dates tell stories before people do, hit that like button now, because one date in particular was about to stop this courtroom cold. "Miss Rivera," he said, tapping the May 14 ticket, "what happened on this day?" Alicia blinked once. "Which one?" "This hydrant violation." She looked at the paper. For the first time since stepping up, her face changed, not softer, older, like the date itself weighed something. "That was my daughter's asthma night." The gallery went still. Judge Caprio asked, "How old is your daughter?" 6, Elena. She turned 6 in August." "And what happened?" Alicia swallowed. She couldn't breathe. No one moved, not even the clerk. Alicia looked down at the microphone like she hated needing it. Dee had wheezing before. Inhaler usually handled it. But that night she was on the floor of our kitchen by the radiator, and she had that look. Her voice thinned. You know that look when a kid's eyes get big because they know something's wrong before you say it. Judge Caprio nodded, slowly. "I grabbed her. My son Mateo was crying. My mother was yelling from the couch to call 911. But our building's on one-way crap, and the ambulance last time took forever, and the Walgreens on Broad had the nebulizer tubing my insurance kept saying was delayed. So I put my hazards on. I ran inside. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. Daniel Keene flipped through the citation file. The officer notes the vehicle was unattended. Alicia snapped. "Yeah, because I didn't carry the whole car into the store." Then she shut her eyes. Shame crossed her face like a shadow. "Sorry," she muttered. Judge Caprio kept his tone gentle. "Did you bring anything from that incident?" She lifted the manila envelope. Her hands were shaking now, just slightly. "Hospital discharge papers, prescription summary, and a note from Dr. Neha Shah at Hasbro. They said to keep it because school was asking questions. Maria took the envelope, passed the papers up. Caprio adjusted his glasses. There it was. Hasbro Children's Hospital. Date matched. Admission at 7:26 p.m. Acute asthma exacerbation. Oxygen saturation documented at 87% on arrival. A small sound moved through the courtroom. Not quite a gasp, more like the room exhaled at once. The judge looked back down. Why didn't you send this in sooner? Alicia laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Send it where? To who? I got notices in the mail that looked like they were written by robots. I called one number and got put on hold for 41 minutes while my son was doing homework on the floor. Then the line dropped. That hit, because everybody there knew exactly what she meant. Judge Caprio leaned back, and the June 2 citation on Eddy Street. That was me bringing my mother to Rhode Island Hospital for dialysis. You parked in a loading zone. Because every handicap space was gone, and she can't walk half a block in the heat. The prosecutor said, Your Honor, there are legal alternatives even in difficult situations. Alicia turned her head, and the look she gave him could have peeled paint. Legal alternatives. You want me to wheel a 61-year-old woman with swollen ankles and a chest full of fluid from the next zip code? Alicia, Judge Caprio said quietly. That was the first time he used her first name. It landed. She looked back at him, breathing harder now. Sorry. Did your mother make that dialysis appointment? Yes. Did she survive that week? The question stunned the room. Alicia nodded once. Yeah. Then let's keep going. Everyone in the room felt it right there. This was no longer about meters and curb paint. This was becoming a referendum on what the law sees and what it misses. Judge Caprio examined the June 2 paperwork. Dialysis appointment confirmation. Check-in at 8:32 a.m. Transport not available due to service delay. Alicia had handwritten notes on the margin of the letter in blue pen. Don't lose this. Bring to court. Ask for mercy. The last two words were crossed out so hard they nearly tore the page. Who crossed out the word mercy? The judge asked. Alicia's voice dropped. I did. Why? Because every time you ask for mercy, people hear weakness, and weak people get crushed. That line went through the room like electricity. That was one of those statements people don't forget. The kind clipped into shorts and stitched over black and white slow motion by midnight. The kind that doesn't sound written because pain wrote it long before cameras did. Judge Caprio looked at her for a long moment. Miss Rivera, pride sounds like arrogance when a person has been humiliated too long. Nobody whispered after that. Nobody dared. If that quote hit you in the chest, drop a comment telling us whether you think pride is sometimes just pain wearing armor, because that sentence changed the mood of the room instantly. Then came the citation from June 28, the one that seemed hardest to explain. Meter expired on Richmond Street at 11:56 p.m. Not near a hospital, not by a pharmacy, not outside a courthouse. Late night, downtown. On the surface, it looked bad. Alicia saw the paper and visibly froze. Judge Caprio noticed, What about this one? She didn't answer. Alicia. Her eyes stayed on the file. That one's different. How so? It just is. Daniel Keene spoke carefully. Your Honor, the city would note that not every citation appears to be connected to an emergency. Alicia's cheeks flushed red. She gripped the edge of the podium. I know. Judge Caprio's voice softened further. Then help me understand. The silence stretched. Courtroom silence is its own species. It is not absence. It hums, it presses. It makes people hear their own pulse. Finally, Alicia said, I was sleeping in my car. That broke the silence so completely, people looked up from their laps. Maria Lombardi stopped writing. Even the bailiff shifted his stance. Alicia stared straight ahead now, not at anyone. For 3 nights that week, maybe 4, I lost count. Judge Caprio frowned. Why were you sleeping in your car? Because my ex found out where I was staying. Now the story tilted again. Not a little, completely. She kept going before anyone could interrupt. Marcus Dean, he's my kid's father. We split 2 years ago. He came around when he felt like it. Promised money brought chaos. Promised diapers brought lies. Promised he changed brought bruises. She said it flatly, which somehow made it worse. He showed up outside our building on June 27 around 10 at night. My son saw him first through the blinds, said, "Mom, Dad's here and he looks mad." Judge Caprio asked, "Did he threaten you?" "He didn't have to. I know his face." "Did you call police?" "I did after he kicked the bottom panel off the front door." Daniel Keene looked down at the packet. "There is no police report in the court file." Alicia laughed again, more bitter this time. "Of course there is." Judge Caprio turned to the clerk. "Maria, can we check with records for a police call on June 27 or 28 connected to Miss Rivera's address?" Maria nodded and turned toward the side terminal. The room shifted into that rare zone where a routine hearing becomes live drama. People who had been bored 10 minutes earlier were now leaning forward with both elbows on their knees. A man in a Patriots windbreaker stopped scrolling on his phone. An older woman with a yellow scarf pressed a hand to her mouth. Because now there was a new question hanging over everything. If Alicia was telling the truth, then that meter ticket had been written while a single mother hid in a Corolla, so her children could sleep somewhere their father wouldn't find them. And if that was true, then the city had tried to collect $846 from a woman whose real debt was survival. Judge Caprio asked softly, "Where were your children?" "With me the first night, then with my neighbor Yvette the next 2. "How old are they?" "Mateo is 9, Alina is 6. "Where was your mother?" "On Yvette's couch with the oxygen machine." The judge looked at her with something beyond sympathy now, something closer to anger but disciplined. "So on June 28, you were in that car alone?" She nodded. "In Richmond Street." "Because it was lit. There were cameras, and a Dunkin' stayed open late around the corner, so I figured if Marcus came by, at least somebody would see." That line chilled the room. Maria turned from the terminal. "Your Honor, there's a Providence police response log on June 27, 10:18 p.m., disturbance call at 194 Potters Avenue. No arrest. Reporting party listed as Alicia Rivera." A low murmur rolled through the gallery. Alicia didn't look relieved. She looked exposed. Judge Caprio asked, "Would you like a moment?" "No," then after a beat, "If I stop, I won't start again." That one was another quote people would remember. The judge nodded. "Then we continue." What nobody knew yet was that the most damaging piece of evidence wasn't the police log, or the hospital record, or even the dialysis paperwork. It was sitting in the same manila envelope, folded into thirds, written in uneven pencil on lined notebook paper torn from a third-grade workbook. And Judge Caprio was about to read it. Like this video, if you think the truth usually arrives in pieces, because the next piece was small enough to fit in a child's hand and heavy enough to change the entire courtroom. "Your Honor," Alicia said quickly, seeing him reach into the envelope again, "not that one." He looked up. "What is it?" "It's nothing." "Miss Rivera, I've been doing this a long time. Parents don't say not that one about nothing." Alicia's eyes flooded before any tears fell. "It's from my son." Judge Caprio held the folded page carefully. "May I read it?" She hesitated. Pride wrestled humiliation right there in front of everyone. Then she gave the smallest nod. The courtroom became so quiet that when someone coughed in the back, it sounded rude. Judge Caprio unfolded the note. He read silently for 3 seconds. Then his expression changed. People who watched him for years knew that face. It was the face he made when something reached past law and grabbed the human being under the robe. He began to read aloud. Dear whoever reads this, my mom is not a bad person. She just has too many things at the same time. She always says we're okay even when she didn't eat dinner so we can. If you take her car, she can't get me to school and my sister to the doctor. Please don't be mean to her because she cries in the bathroom and tells us the shower is on so we don't hear. Thank you, Mateo Rivera. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then from somewhere near the second row, a woman whispered, "Oh my God." Alicia turned away from the mic and pressed her fist against her mouth. Her shoulders started shaking. Not loud crying. The kind of crying people do when they've trained themselves not to make sound. Judge Caprio lowered the letter slowly. This was written by a 9-year-old. Yes. When? Sunday. Did you ask him to write it? No, I found it in my purse Monday morning. Daniel Keene removed his glasses. For the first time all hearing, he had no immediate procedural comment. Judge Caprio looked toward the gallery, then back at Alicia. How long have you been carrying all of this by yourself? She wiped her face fast, annoyed at herself for crying. Since forever, probably. That is not a legal time frame. That got a sad laugh from the room, and the release mattered. It gave everyone half a breath. Alicia answered more honestly now. Since my father died, since my mother got sick, since Mateo started asking questions I couldn't answer, since Alina had her second ambulance ride, since the rent went up, since daycare went up, since eggs cost crazy money, since my ex figured out apologies open doors if you say them enough. She looked up finally. Pick one. The judge nodded once, fair enough. Then Daniel Keene cleared his throat again, but this time his voice had changed. Less adversarial, more careful. Your Honor, while the city maintains the validity of the citations as written, I would ask whether there is supporting documentation on the August 3 no-standing violation before the court considers full dismissal. That was the prosecutor doing his job, but it was also the system hanging by one last thread. August 3. If that date held up as simple carelessness, then maybe this still ended with partial payment and a lecture. Maybe compassion, but limited compassion, measured compassion, bureaucratically approved compassion. Judge Caprio turned the page. Miss Rivera, August 3. Her face dropped again. That was the worst day, she said. Tell me. It was the day I almost lost my job. Why? Because my daughter's school called and said Alina had a fever and they thought it might be pneumonia. I was already late to Elmhurst because my mother's home aide didn't show. Then my landlord texted that if I didn't come sign the lease renewal by 5, she was giving the apartment to the couple downstairs. Then my supervisor called and said if I missed another shift, don't bother coming back. So I parked in front of my building where I wasn't supposed to, ran upstairs to get the lease packet, ran back down, and there was a ticket already under my wiper. How long were you gone? Maybe 6 minutes. S. Did you speak to the officer? I tried. How did that go? Alicia closed her eyes. Not good. What happened? I said, are you serious right now? He said, move the car. I said, I live here. He said, then you know the sign. I said something I probably shouldn't repeat in front of your honor. Even Ron the bailiff smiled at that. Judge Caprio asked, did you curse at him? Yes. Did he curse at you? No. Did he remain professional? Yes. Then let's say this clearly. You were under pressure, but you were wrong to take that out on him. Alicia nodded immediately. I know. There it was, another crack in the armor, not forced, earned. Judge Caprio said, that matters. Because I was angry at everybody, she admitted, and he was just there. That line changed something too. It made room for responsibility. Mercy without honesty becomes sentiment. Mercy with honesty becomes transformation. If you respect people who can admit when they were wrong, even in the middle of being overwhelmed, hit that subscribe button, because what Alicia confessed next made her impossible to dismiss as either victim or villain. She was something harder to categorize. She was real. Judge Caprio asked, "What did you say to the officer?" Alicia stared at the wood grain on the podium. "I told him if the city cared half as much about mothers as it cared about white signs with red letters, Providence would be a different place." No laughter now, because even if it was disrespectful, it was also painfully clear why the sentence had been waiting inside her. Judge Caprio folded his hands. "Do you believe that?" Alicia thought for a long second. "I think cities love saying family. They don't love family logistics." That was the third quote people would repeat later. Daniel Keene looked up. Even he seemed to know it. Judge Caprio asked the clerk to request the officer's notes. Maria printed the ticket image from the system. There was also a body cam reference number attached because the issuing officer had been responding to a separate disturbance 2 buildings down. "Can we pull body cam?" the judge asked. Keene answered, "Not instantly, Your Honor, but dispatch may have the summary." Maria made the call. This was no longer a typical hearing. This was an excavation. Alicia stood there with both hands wrapped around the podium, as if it were the only solid thing in the room. Her face had gone pale under the fluorescent lights. The skin beneath her eyes was dark. She looked like somebody who hadn't had the luxury of falling apart because too many people depended on the pieces. Judge Caprio asked quietly, "Miss Rivera, do you have anyone here with you today?" "No." "Anyone watching your children besides your neighbor?" "Yvette's got Alina, Mateo's in school." "Does your employer know you're here?" "They know I asked for half-day. Don't know if I still have the half-day." "What do you mean?" Alicia hesitated. "My supervisor Denise texted at 8:42. She said if I'm not there by 1, I'm off the schedule for the weekend." "So what time do you need to leave?" "Soon." That changed the stakes yet again. The courtroom could see it now. Every extra minute of justice carried its own cost. Poor people pay for process by the hour. Wealthy people pay lawyers to stand there for them. Judge Caprio said, "We will not waste your time." Alicia almost laughed at the irony, but stopped herself. Maria returned from the side phone. "Your Honor, dispatch confirms body cam exists on August 3 incident. Officer Sean Donnelly filed supplemental note stating driver identified herself as resident, requested discretion due to sick child upstairs, and was visibly upset." He notes, quote, "Driver apologized before leaving scene. Recommend review if contested." The room reacted immediately. Judge Caprio looked at Keene. That recommendation did not make it into the city's summary. Keene looked uncomfortable. "Apparently not, Your Honor." Alicia blinked hard. "He wrote that." "Yes," Maria said. Alicia's mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't know that." Nobody did. Now there was a new villain in the room, and it wasn't a person. It was the gap. The gap between what happened and what got processed. Between what an officer noticed in the moment and what a notice in the mail reduced to a balance due. Judge Caprio's tone deepened. "A courtroom is not a cash register." That was the line. You could feel it land before anybody even reacted. He repeated it slower. "A courtroom is not a cash register. If an officer on the street takes the time to note context, then this court will take the time to read it." A full gasp came from somewhere behind Alicia. Because everybody knew this had just become bigger than her ticket. This was now Judge Caprio drawing a line between justice and collection. And still, somehow, there was more. Because Maria had one more note in her hand. "Your Honor," she said, There is also an incident supplement from May 14 attached. To the hydrant citation. Alicia looked up fast. What does it say? Judge Caprio asked. Maria read. Driver returned carrying pharmacy bag and crying child with audible respiratory distress. EMS had not yet arrived. Officer elected to leave citation, but assisted in clearing traffic until ambulance arrival. Silence. Then a sound so sharp it might as well have been a slap. A man in the front row whispered, "They ticketed her anyway." That was the outrage moment. Raw, immediate, collective. And once that outrage enters a room, it changes how every prior fact is interpreted. Judge Caprio looked stunned but contained. Miss Rivera, you were ticketed while carrying a child in respiratory distress. Alicia's voice went hollow. Yeah. Did anyone tell you there was any way to contest it with emergency documentation? No. Did anyone offer you a hardship review? She gave him an empty look. A what? Daniel Keene lowered his head. If this is making your blood boil, like this video right now, because most people can handle a hard rule, but what they can't stomach is a system that sees the emergency and still pushes the paper through. The judge leaned forward. Miss Rivera, why didn't you come to court in July when the first notice was issued? Alicia closed her eyes. Another silence. Then she answered, because on the morning of the hearing, my mother collapsed in the bathroom. The room was already fragile. That nearly broke it. She slipped, the judge asked. No, she fainted. Blood pressure dropped after dialysis. Hit her shoulder on the tub. I spent 6 hours at Roger Williams Medical Center and forgot this place even existed until I found the missed notice under a pile of cereal coupons and school forms. Did you bring that hospital record? Yes. Of course she did. Because people who live under suspicion learn to carry evidence the way other people carry wallets. Maria handed the next paper up. Shoulder contusion, orthostatic episode, discharge at 4:16 p.m. Judge Caprio sat back slowly. Miss Rivera, has there been one normal month in your life recently? Alicia actually smiled then, a crooked, exhausted smile. What's normal cost these days? Even he smiled at that one. But the next turn came from somewhere nobody expected. The gallery. A woman in a red raincoat stood up halfway before Ron. The bailiff motioned her to wait. Your Honor, I know her. Judge Caprio looked over. Ma'am, please state your name. Yvette Coleman. I'm the neighbor she keeps talking about. Are you here on another matter? Yes, parking meter, but I'm here. Do you wish to say something relevant? Yvette nodded firmly. She was probably in her late 40s, hair braided neat, hands rough the way home health workers' hands often are. I watched her kids. I watched her mother. I watched her come home at 7 in the morning smelling like bleach and old coffee and still get them dressed for school. She slept in that Corolla right outside my cousin's beauty shop. I saw her. Marcus drove by twice that week in a black Nissan Altima with one headlight out. She wasn't playing victim. She was trying not to become one. That line cracked through the room. Judge Caprio asked, did you witness the May 14 incident? I saw the ambulance lights. Little Alina was wheezing so hard it sounded like paper tearing. Now even the people who had arrived annoyed by their own tickets were looking at Alicia like they were ashamed of ever assuming she was just another excuse. Judge Caprio thanked Yvette and let her sit. Then Alicia said something barely above a whisper. I didn't know you saw all that. Yvette answered from the gallery, baby, everybody on that block saw. You just never stopped long enough to look around. That was the breaking point. Alicia bent forward and covered her face fully. Her whole body shook. Not the careful, silent crying from before. This time the grief came with breath, with years, with every held-in thing finally finding air. No one rushed her. No one filled the silence. Sometimes the most respectful thing a room can do is not interrupt a person's collapse. Judge Caprio waited. When Alicia finally straightened up, her voice was stripped clean. No performance, no edge, no pride left pretending to be control. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" the judge asked. "For acting like I didn't care. I care too much. That's the problem. If I let myself feel all of it, I don't think I could keep moving." Judge Caprio answered with the calm force only he could bring to a sentence like this. The strongest people are often the ones who look the angriest, because they learned nobody hears quiet pain. That was the fourth quote, maybe the strongest of all. People in the room nodded without realizing they were doing it. But Daniel Keene still had one legal concern left, and to his credit, he raised it honestly. "Your Honor, if the court is considering broad relief, there remains the issue of license reinstatement and whether dismissal of Th. underlying citations would fully resolve the suspension hold." Alicia's head snapped up. "What suspension?" The room turned again. Keene checked the file. A hold was entered after failure to appear an unpaid balance threshold. It may not yet be an active suspension, but the reinstatement process has begun. Alicia went white. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means if not addressed promptly, your license could be suspended." "How promptly?" Keene checked. "Within 10 business days." She stared at him as if he'd announced the sky was falling. "I drive my kids everywhere." Judge Caprio asked, "How were you not notified?" "I moved apartments in August. Mail got messed up." Maria quietly said, "The updated address wasn't entered until September 1. Alicia laughed once, stunned. "So I'm 10 business days away from losing the only thing holding my life together, and I find out here." Nobody had a good answer. That was the consequence moment, the true edge of the cliff, because now this wasn't just about old tickets. This was about a future collapse already in motion. And Judge Caprio made a decision. "Ron," he said to the bailiff, "hold the next 2 cases." The room buzzed instantly. Municipal court does not stop lightly. Dockets move. Machines move. Calendars move. Judges do not pause everything for one person unless something extraordinary is happening. Ron stepped to the side door and signaled the clerk outside. Judge Caprio turned back to Alicia. "We are going to sort this out now." Her lips parted. "Now?" "Yes, before you leave this room." That was the moment everybody knew. This would be the clip. The one people sent to family chats with all caps and crying emojis. The one reporters would describe as rare and viewers would call unforgettable. Share this with someone who still believes compassion can be strong instead of soft. Because when Judge Caprio stopped that docket, everybody in the room understood they were watching something different. He asked Maria to contact the DMV liaison assigned to municipal matters. He asked Daniel Keene to review whether the emergency-link citations could be dismissed in the interest of justice. He asked whether Officer Donnelly was on duty and could be reached by phone. And while the court began moving pieces in real time, Alicia stood there looking like she didn't know whether to collapse again or run. Judge Caprio noticed, "Sit down if you need to." "I'm okay." "You haven't slept." "I've had worse." That is not the same answer. Yvette rose from the gallery with a bottle of water from her purse. Ron allowed it. She handed it to Alicia, who took it with trembling fingers. "Drink," Yvette said. Alicia whispered, "Thank you." And then, in one of those human little moments that make the big ones feel true, the cap slipped from Alicia's hand and rolled under the podium because her fingers were shaking too hard to grip it. Ron bent down, retrieved it, handed it back, and said gently, "No rush." That nearly made half the room cry all over again. While Maria worked the phones, Judge Caprio asked the question no file ever asks soon enough. "Miss Rivera, are you safe now?" Alicia hesitated too long. No, she admitted. Is Marcus still around? Not every day, enough. Do you have a restraining order? I filed once, didn't follow through. Why not? She looked embarrassed. He cried, said the kids needed a father, said court would ruin his job. Daniel Keene closed his eyes briefly. He had heard versions of that story before. Judge Caprio said, "And what did it do to your job?" Alicia let out a breath. Ruined sleep. Not a joke, just a fact. The judge nodded. Will you speak with a domestic violence advocate if I ask one to meet you after this hearing? She was startled. Here. Yes, here. I don't want charity. This is not charity, this is support. That word seemed to matter. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, okay. Now the room could see the full arc forming. Outrage had become empathy. Empathy was becoming action. But the turn toward inspiration had not happened yet, not until the next revelation. Maria hung up one phone and lifted another note. Your Honor, Officer Donnelly is on his meal break but available by speaker if the court wishes. Judge Caprio nodded, please. Seconds later, a slightly crackling voice filled the room. Officer Donnelly. This is Judge Caprio in municipal court, the judge said. I have Miss Alicia Rivera before me regarding the August 3 no-standing citation and an earlier hydrant citation on May 14. I understand you made supplemental notes. Yes, Your Honor. Can you tell the court what you observed? The whole room leaned in. On speaker, Officer Donnelly sounded precise, a little surprised but respectful. On August 3, I was responding to a noise complaint. I observed Miss Rivera's vehicle in a posted no-standing zone. When I approached, she came downstairs quickly, appeared distressed, stated her child was ill. Indeed, she was retrieving paperwork from the apartment. She was frustrated and raised her voice. I issued the citation. Before leaving, she apologized. I noted the circumstances because she seemed overwhelmed, not evasive. Judge Caprio asked, and May 14. Hydrant violation on Broad Street. Vehicle unattended. Driver returned with a pharmacy bag and a minor female in obvious respiratory distress. I recall she was crying. I assisted with traffic because an ambulance was inbound. Citation had already been initiated. Did you feel discretion would have been appropriate? There was a pause. Then Officer Donnelly said, personally, yes, Your Honor. The room erupted in murmurs. Alicia stared at the speakerphone like it had turned into a witness stand for fate itself. Judge Caprio thanked the officer and ended the call. Then he looked at Daniel Keene, counsel. Keene stood. In light of the officer's testimony, the documentation provided, and the cumulative circumstances, the city would not oppose dismissal of the May 14 and August 3 citations. A wave of relief hit the room. Alicia's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the podium. But Judge Caprio held up a finger. We are not done. Because he knew what everyone else was about to learn. Even if 2 citations vanished, she still faced the June 2 loading zone, the June 28 meter, the failure to appear, and the administrative hold. And there was still more inside that manila envelope. If you're still here, drop a comment telling us whether you think justice means strict consistency or honest context, because Caprio was about to answer that question in a way nobody saw coming. Alicia, he said, using her first name again, is there anything else in this file I should see? She looked miserable. There's one more letter. From whom? My supervisor. May I? She handed it over herself this time. Elmhurst Rehabilitation Center letterhead. Denise Hart, staffing coordinator. The judge read quietly, then looked up. This says you requested a modified schedule twice because of family medical emergencies, and your attendance was otherwise excellent. Alicia nodded. It also says you picked up 6 extra overnight shifts in July after another aide quit. Needed the money. Denise writes here, Ms. Rivera is blunt under stress but among our most dependable employees. Residents ask for her by name. Alicia blinked fast. She wrote that. Yes. A small broken laugh escaped her. She never says nice things to my face. That got real laughter this time, full laughter, the kind that heals a little. Judge Caprio smiled. Many supervisors save their best sentences for paper. Then his eyes moved to the bottom page. And this note attached from resident family member Mrs. Alina Fitch. Do you know her? Alicia frowned. Tall woman always smells like Chanel. The room laughed again. Judge Caprio read aloud. Alicia sat with my father when he was sundowning and frightened, even after her shift ended. If this letter helps her in any legal matter, please know she gave my father dignity when he had very little left. Alicia closed her eyes. She couldn't absorb any more kindness without crying again. Judge Caprio set the letter down with care. Sometimes the people doing the hardest jobs leave the lightest footprints. That does not mean they carry less. That was quote number 5. And still, the meter citation on Richmond Street remained. The hardest one. The one tied not to an ambulance or dialysis, but to sleeping in a car under the threat of domestic violence. Judge Caprio folded his hands. Alicia, when you stayed in the Corolla, did you use a shelter? No. Why not? I called one. They had one bed, not for boys over 8. Mateo heard me asking and said he'd rather sleep in the car than leave his sister. So I told him we were having an adventure and bought them hot chocolate from the Dunkin' with my last $6. There are moments when a courtroom is no longer a place of law but a place of witness. That was one. Did Marcus contact you during those nights? The judge asked. She nodded. 12 calls, 17 texts. Do you still have them? Yes. Show the clerk. Maria looked at the cracked Samsung screen. Message after message. Where are you? I'm outside. Don't keep my kids from me. You think court scares me. Open the door. I see your car. The last text, time-stamped 11:41 p.m., said, keep hiding. You can't do it forever. The meter ticket was written at 11:56. The room practically recoiled. Daniel Keene asked quietly, was this information ever presented in contest paperwork? Alicia shook her head. I didn't know it mattered. Judge Caprio looked up sharply. It matters. Then he said the sentence that would later get quoted in articles, stitched into compilations, and printed in comments by people who had never stepped inside municipal court. Justice without context is just paperwork in a robe. The room fell into reverent silence. He let it stay there. Then, Maria received another call and covered the receiver. Your Honor, DMV liaison on line 2. Go ahead. She listened, nodding, then relayed. Because the hold has not yet converted to full suspension, the court may clear it today if balances are resolved or otherwise adjudicated. Judge Caprio looked at the remaining citations. This was the fork in the road, choice and consequence, mercy with limits or mercy with vision. He asked Daniel Keene, the June 2 loading zone. Keene stood. The city recognizes the dialysis documentation, but notes the parking itself occurred. Of course it occurred. The question is whether punishment serves any meaningful purpose. Keene took a breath. Given the totality, the city would reduce it to court costs. Amount: $25. That seemed fair, measured, reasonable. Then Caprio asked, and the June 28 meter while the defendant was sheltering in her vehicle due to a domestic disturbance. Keene looked at the texts, the police log, the testimony from Yvette, the child's letter, the body cam notes already in the record. The city, he said slowly, would leave that to the court's discretion. Now everyone looked at the judge. Alicia, who had spent most of the hearing braced for punishment, actually seemed frightened by possibility. Hope can scare people who no longer budget for it. Judge Caprio glanced at the clock. 10:07 a.m. Nearly an hour had passed since her case was called, an eternity in municipal court, a lifetime in a life like hers. He could have ruled right there. Instead, he did something nobody expected. "Ron," he said, "close the courtroom doors for a moment." A ripple of surprise moved across the room. Ron did it. The hallway noise dimmed. The fluorescent hum became louder. Rain tapped faintly at the high windows. Judge Caprio looked out over every person in that room, people waiting for their own hearings. The clerk, the prosecutor, the bailiff, the neighbor in the red coat, the young mother at the podium trying not to sway from lack of sleep. Then he said, "This court is going to take 5 minutes not to process a file, but to see a person." Nobody forgot that sentence. He turned back to Alicia. "You have made mistakes." She nodded. "You were disrespectful to an officer." "Yes." "You ignored notices." "Yes." "You let fear and exhaustion decide too many things." Tears slid down her cheeks as she answered, "Yes." He leaned forward, voice gentle and unbreakable. "But this court will not punish survival as if it were indifference." The gallery gasped. A woman in the third row started crying openly. That was the justice served satisfaction moment. Clean, powerful, but it was not the climax yet. Because what Judge Caprio did next pushed the whole story beyond mercy and into something people would call legendary. Like this video, if you think the best judges don't just know the law, they know when humanity is trying to speak through the cracks of it, because Caprio was only getting started. He dismissed the May 14 hydrant citation. He dismissed the August 3 no-standing citation. He vacated the failure to appear penalty due to documented family medical emergency. He set aside the June 28-meter citation in the interest of justice, citing verified domestic safety concerns. Then he paused over the June 2 loading zone. $25 in costs, he said. Alicia nodded quickly. "Okay, I can do that." Judge Caprio asked, "Can you?" She hesitated just enough. Her silence answered for her. "How much cash do you have on you?" Alicia looked embarrassed. $11. Daniel Keene stared at the file. Judge Caprio asked, "How much in your checking account?" Alicia laughed weakly. "Do you want the honest answer or the bank answer before pending charges?" "Honest." 32. "Any payday loan?" "Yes." "Overdue rent?" "Yes." "Electric?" "Yes." "Groceries?" "Depends what you count as groceries." The room shifted again, because now the problem had become absurdly specific, not a moral failure. $11 in a purse, 32 in checking, 25 owed to clear the last legal obstacle standing between a mother and her license. And even that was too much. Judge Caprio reached toward his robe pocket, then stopped himself. Anyone who knew him knew what he had almost done. The room knew too. He smiled faintly, almost at himself, and looked toward the gallery instead. "This is not a telethon, ladies and gentlemen." A little laughter broke the tension. Then Yvette spoke up from the second row. "I got the 25. Alicia spun around. "No." Yvette shrugged. "Yes." A man in the Patriots windbreaker reached into his pocket. "I got 10 too." Maria looked stunned. Ron smiled openly. Even Daniel Keene's mouth twitched. Judge Caprio raised a hand. "Everybody stop, sit. This court does not pass a hat." He let the laughter settle. Then, with perfect timing, he said, "But the clerk may accept a lawful payment from any person the defendant authorizes." The room X. Plotted. People laughed, clapped, wiped tears, shook heads. Ron actually had to call for order through a grin. It was the kind of release that happens only when pressure has been building for an hour and finally finds a door. Alicia turned fully toward Yvette now. You already do enough. Yvette said, baby, enough is what neighbors decide together. That line hit almost as hard as the judge's quotes. Alicia looked back at Caprio, overwhelmed. Your Honor, I can pay her back Friday. Judge Caprio said, that is between neighbors. What is between you and this court is that once this cost is paid, the hold comes off today. Alicia stopped breathing for a second. Today. Today. You mean I can still drive? Yes, legally, today. She covered her mouth with both hands. It was not dignified. It was not restrained. It was relief hitting a nervous system too fast to organize. People in the gallery were crying now. Men, too. Especially the older ones who had daughters and understood exactly what losing a license means when your whole family rides in the back seat of your only asset. Maria processed the payment. Yvette walked up, set down a folded 20 and a 5 without making a speech. That detail mattered. Real generosity doesn't always need dialogue. The receipt printed with a thin mechanical whine. Maria handed it to Alicia. Alicia stared at the paper like it was permission to breathe. But Judge Caprio still wasn't done. He asked Maria to contact the domestic violence advocate desk in the building. He asked Ron to see whether someone from community services was available to help Alicia update her address, review transportation backup options, and connect her with a legal advocate about the protective order. He asked whether Providence Housing Resources had any emergency stabilization list for working parents. This was the legendary part, not just dismissal, coordination, intervention, refusal to let the woman walk out with only temporary relief and no structure. Alicia looked almost panicked by the attention. Your Honor, really, this is too much. He answered with a line people would clip and post for years. No, Miss Rivera, too much is what you have been carrying. This is what help looks like. That was the unexpected compassion moment, and it flattened the room. Share this with someone who needs proof that real compassion can still look strong, because when he said that, everybody in the courtroom knew they were witnessing more than a ruling. They were watching a standard being set. Then came the twist nobody expected around all that mercy. Maria, sorting the last pages, found one more document that had been misfiled behind the notices. A towing invoice, dated September 12, not part of the court matter but attached through city records. Your Honor, she said carefully, there appears to have been a tow. Alicia's face changed instantly. That was separate. Separate from what? The judge asked. From these, it was last month. What happened? She looked down. I was parked on Harrison Street overnight. Why? Because my alternator died. Were you ticketed? Yeah, then towed. How much did that cost? She gave a tiny, hopeless laugh. $462. The gallery groaned, out loud. Did you get the car back? Caprio asked. Yes, borrowed from my cousin, still owe her. Is the vehicle currently operable? Mostly. Mostly is not a mechanical term. That got another sad laugh. Alicia finally admitted, the battery light comes on at stoplights. Judge Caprio looked at Ron. See if the advocate desk has any transportation resource sheet, also any legal aid contacts for debt counseling. Alicia shook her head, tears back again. Why are you doing all this? And that question made the whole room hold still, because everybody wanted the answer. Judge Caprio leaned forward, voice low and steady. Because everybody in this room can see you are one flat tire away from disaster, and pretending otherwise would be easier for us, not fairer to you. That was the breakthrough, the moral center of the story. He wasn't rescuing her because she was perfect. He was refusing to cooperate with a lie that said she was merely irresponsible. Daniel Keene stood again, unexpectedly. Your Honor, if the court permits, I would like the record to reflect that the city will waive any administrative processing fee connected to the dismissed matters. Even Alicia looked surprised. Caprio nodded, "Thank you, counsel." Keene turned slightly toward Alicia. "For what it's worth, Miss Rivera, I'm glad you came in today." She stared at him, then gave the smallest nod. "Me too." There it was, antagonism softening into shared humanity, not sentimental, earned. But the story still had one more twist to deliver before resolution. A twist that pushed it from powerful to unforgettable. Because just as Ron returned with a card for an advocate named Tasha Coleman and a printout of community contacts, the courtroom doors opened. A woman in a charcoal blazer stepped in carrying a navy tote bag and scanning the room like she had run here. Sorry, she whispered to Ron. "I'm Denise Hart from Elmhurst, Alicia Rivera." Alicia turned around so fast her chair scraped. "Denise, I came as soon as Yvette texted me." The room erupted again. Yvette raised a guilty hand from the gallery. "I know people." Denise walked forward, still breathing hard. She was in her 40s, hair clipped tight, badge hanging from her waist, the look of a competent woman who never leaves work fully at work. "Your Honor, I'm her supervisor. I just want to say for the record, if she's late today, that's my fault now." Laughter and tears at the same time, the most human combination. Judge Caprio smiled. "Thank you, Ms. Hart." Denise wasn't finished. She turned to Alicia. "And before you get mad, I also talked to payroll. We're fixing the shift differential error from August." Alicia blinked. "What error?" Denise opened the tote, pulled out a pay stub printout. "They shorted you 18 hours. Alicia just stared. "How much?" she asked. $312 before taxes. The room exploded. This was the "but wait, there's more" twist, and it felt scripted even though it didn't. The universe rarely hands relief in one neat package, but sometimes, once one person takes the truth seriously, other truths rush in behind it. Alicia looked like the floor had disappeared under her. "You're serious?" Denise nodded. "Direct deposit tonight." Yvette threw both hands in the air. "Come on now." Even Ron laughed. Judge Caprio looked at Alicia with a kind of quiet satisfaction. "Miss Rivera, maybe the tide is changing." That was the redemption to hope transition, and it hit perfectly. If you're feeling this right now, drop a comment telling us the moment you realized this wasn't going to end like a normal courtroom clip, because the room itself had completely transformed. Alicia wiped her face. "I don't even know what to say." Judge Caprio answered, "Start with this. When help shows up, take it." She nodded. "And then," he added, "when your feet are under you again, offer it to somebody else." Another nod, stronger this time. He looked down at the file one last time. The court dismisses the emergency link citations, vacates the failure penalty, accepts reduced payment on the remaining matter through authorized third-party payment, directs immediate clearance of the administrative hold, and recommends connection with in-building support services before defendant leaves. Miss Rivera, your legal matters before this court are resolved. That sentence did it. Alicia broke completely. She didn't collapse, she didn't scream. She did something much harder, she let herself believe him. Her face folded, shoulders dropped, breath left her body like she had been holding it for months and only just got permission to release it. She cried openly, hand on the podium, the manila envelope pressed to her chest. And then she said the line nobody in that room would ever forget. "I thought today was the day everything was going to get taken from me." Judge Caprio answered without missing a beat. "Sometimes the day you fear most is the day somebody finally sees you." That was the line, the one that would live forever in captions. Yvette stood and clapped first. Then Denise. Then the woman in the yellow scarf. Then the man in the Patriots jacket. Then the whole room. A courtroom full of people with their own problems, their own tickets, their own frustrations, standing for one exhausted single mother because justice had, for one rare hour, felt like recognition. Ron tried to restore order, but even he was smiling too hard to make it convincing. Judge Caprio let the applause happen for 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then he tapped the bench lightly. All right, this is still a court of law, not a Broadway matinee. Laughter through tears, perfect release. Then he looked directly at Alicia one last time. Go to work, hug your children, and update your address with every office you deal with from now on. The room laughed again. She actually smiled, a real smile this time. Yes, Your Honor. And Alicia. Yes. Next time life is on fire, ask for help before the smoke reaches the ceiling. She nodded, crying and smiling at once. I will. That was the resolution point, but not the end. Because the best courtroom stories don't end with the gavel. They end when the ruling survives contact with real life. Alicia stepped down from the podium and turned toward Yvette first. She hugged her hard. Then Denise. Then, a little awkwardly because she wasn't used to kindness being public, she looked toward the gallery and said, "Thank you." Not to any one person, to the room. And the room answered with nods, soft claps, murmured blessings, the kind of collective acknowledgement that tells somebody they did not imagine their struggle. Tasha Coleman, the advocate from downstairs, arrived. Just in time to walk with Alicia to the hallway. She wore a county badge and sensible shoes and carried a folder thick with resource sheets. Judge Caprio watched them leave. Then he looked at the next case on his docket and paused a beat longer than usual. Because everyone in the room knew the atmosphere had changed. The courtroom didn't feel like a conveyor belt anymore. It felt, if only for a little while, like a place where truth had weight. And if you think stories like this should be seen by more people, like this video now, because the world gets loud with cruelty and somehow still acts surprised when mercy becomes the part we all replay. For the next few weeks, the clip moved exactly the way people in that room knew it would. First, somebody uploaded a shaky excerpt from the gallery. Then the clean court feed surfaced. Then captions. Then reaction channels. Then the quotes. Pride sounds like arrogance when a person has been humiliated too long. A courtroom is not a cash register. Justice without context is just paperwork in a robe. The comments poured in by the thousands. Single mothers wrote about parking tickets they got, while carrying babies and groceries at the same time. Nurses wrote about finishing night shifts and going straight to family responsibilities on zero sleep. Men wrote about daughters they wished they had protected better. Former court employees wrote about the difference one judge can make when he treats the file as a beginning instead of an ending. But the part that made the story unforgettable happened 3 months later. It was January 22, 2024. Same courthouse, same fluorescent lights, different morning. The winter air outside had that Rhode Island bite that makes your teeth ache the second you inhale. Inside the lobby, people stamped salt from their boots and shook sleet off their sleeves. Maria Lombardi was sorting the first batch of files when Ron came in holding a white envelope with neat handwriting across the front. For Judge Caprio, from Alicia Rivera and family. Maria smiled immediately. Ron did too. News travels in courthouses. They both knew exactly which Alicia Rivera this had to be. The envelope sat on the bench until the morning calendar break. Then Judge Caprio opened it. Inside was a folded letter, a school picture, and a second note written in much steadier handwriting than the first. Mateo S. The courtroom was quieter than usual at recess when Caprio began to read. Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted to write you after things calmed down because the day in your courtroom changed more than one bill. The hold came off my license that afternoon exactly like you said. Tasha helped me finish the protective order paperwork, and Marcus has not come near us since the hearing in family court. Denise fixed the payroll mistake, and with that money, I caught up my electric enough to keep the shutoff off the door. My cousin got paid back. My mother started getting better transportation to dialysis through a program Tasha helped me find. Elena has not been back to the ER once since we got the new nebulizer supplies. Mateo made honor roll. I am writing this after my first week in a medical assistant training program Elmhurst encouraged me to apply for. I still work too much. I still worry too much. But for the first time in a long time, I don't feel hunted. Even reading it silently would have been powerful. Reading it aloud made it sacred. Then Caprio unfolded Mateo's note. Dear Judge, thank you for not being mean to my mom. She doesn't cry in the bathroom as much now. Also, we got the panda fixed. His name is Bruno. I got honor roll and my sister says her chest is stronger. Mom says when we are okay, we have to help somebody else too, so we brought canned food to church. I think that means your plan worked. At that point, even Maria was wiping tears. Caprio turned over the school picture. Mateo in a navy collared shirt, trying not to smile too much. Elena in a pink cardigan with 2 front teeth missing and eyes bright with the kind of health no discharge summary can fully capture. Tucked behind the photo was a final note from Alicia, shorter than the others. You told me when my feet were under me again, offer help to somebody else. Last month I sat with a new aide at work after her first patient death because I remembered what it felt like when somebody made time for pain instead of paperwork. I thought you should know I heard you. That was the epilogue, not abstract, not sentimental proof. The transformation had lasted. The woman who walked into court defensive, proud, and one bad notice away from collapse had not turned into a saint. She had turned into something better, stable, honest, open to help, determined to pass it on. That's what redemption really looks like. Not perfection, continuation with new posture. And because life likes details, not slogans, there were more. Denise Hart later confirmed Alicia finished the first phase of the medical assistant program near the 2P of her cohort. Yvette told everyone on the block that Alicia finally bought a steering wheel lock and started parking under the church security camera instead of 2 streets over. Tasha reported that Alicia never missed an advocate appointment after that first court day. Mateo's teacher wrote home that he had become noticeably less vigilant in class, which is educator language for a child who no longer expects emergency every minute. Elena's attendance improved. Rosa Rivera's dialysis transport became more reliable. Even the Corolla, miracle of miracles, got a rebuilt alternator donated at labor cost by a mechanic Denise knew through her brother-in-law in Cranston. None of that made headlines. All of it mattered. Because the true long-term impact of mercy is rarely cinematic. It's logistical, it's sleep, it's a ride that works, a bill that gets paid before the red notice, a child who stops listening for shouting through apartment walls, a mother who stops mistaking help for humiliation. That's why this story hit so hard. It wasn't just a courtroom mic drop. It was a public correction to a private lie so many struggling people carry. That if your life looks messy, your character must be too. Judge Caprio rejected that lie in real time. He did not excuse Alicia's disrespect. He named it. He did not pretend the signs on the street didn't matter. They did. He did not call chaos innocence. He called it context. And that distinction is exactly why the story endures. Compassion without truth feels weak. Truth without compassion feels cruel. What people saw in that courtroom was the rare and difficult thing in the middle. Real justice. Months later, when viewers were still sharing the clip, one comment kept rising to the top across platforms. It read, "He didn't just clear her tickets, he interrupted her collapse." That might have been the most accurate summary of all. Because think about the timeline. One more missed notice and her license hold becomes a suspension. One suspension and she loses transportation. Lose transportation and work gets shaky. Work gets shaky and rent gets shaky. Rent gets shaky and the apartment goes. Once the apartment goes, everything else starts falling on top of the children. The system was not just collecting money. It was standing on the first domino while pretending it had nothing to do with the rest. Judge Caprio saw the domino line, and he refused to kick it. That is why the room reacted the way it did. Not because he was generous, because he was accurate. Everybody in that courtroom knew, on a bone level, that Alicia was not standing there because she didn't care. She was standing there because she cared for too many people with too little margin, and the math had finally turned on her. And still, there is one final part of the story people talk about less, maybe because it is quieter than applause. 2 weeks after the January letter, Alicia went back to the courthouse. Not for a ticket, not for a hearing. She went during lunch break with a small paper bag from a bakery on Broad Street. Inside were 6 powdered sugar pastries and one handwritten card for the clerk's office. Maria opened the card. "Thank you for not looking past me when it would have been easy. Please share these with Ron and anyone else who remembers I was the lady crying with the envelope." Maria laughed so hard she had to sit down. Ron took 2 pastries and pretended he only took one. The advocate desk downstairs got the last pair. Tasha taped the card near her monitor for a month because she said too many people only come back to government buildings when they're in trouble, and this reminded her that some of them return when they're healing too. That, too, is part of the legacy of a moment like this. It restores faith not only for the person helped, but for the people inside the system trying not to become numb. If you've ever had one person change the direction of your life just by seeing you clearly, drop a comment telling us what they did, because those stories matter more than people realize. Years from now, people may forget the exact case number. They may forget the amount of the fine. They may even forget which citation came first. But they will remember the image. A tired single mother in worn scrubs, gripping a courthouse podium like it was the last solid thing left in her life. A child's pencil-written letter trembling in an old judge's hand. A prosecutor's setting procedure, aside long enough to honor context. A neighbor in a red raincoat saying enough is what neighbors decide together. A supervisor running into court to say, if she's late today, that's my fault now. And Judge Caprio, calm as ever, stopping the machine long enough to tell the truth out loud. This court will not punish survival as if it were indifference. That is why the moment went viral. Not because it was sentimental, because it was corrective. Not because it was dramatic, because it was recognizable. Millions watched because millions have stood in some version of Alicia's shoes. Maybe not in traffic court, maybe not in Providence, but at some counter, some office, some desk, some phone line where a hard season was mistaken for a hard heart. And what they saw in Caprio was what every wounded person secretly hopes for when they walk into a room run by rules. Someone wise enough to ask one more question. Someone patient enough to read the note. Someone brave enough to stop the process and say, "No, we are not doing this the easy way today." That is legendary. Not because it looked powerful, because it used power correctly. So if you take anything from this story, let it be this. The strongest institutions are not the ones that never bend. They are the ones that know the difference between accountability and blindness. The strongest people are not the ones who never cry. They are the ones who keep showing up while carrying more than anyone around them fully sees. And the strongest form of justice is not punishment that arrives on time. It is wisdom that arrives before a life tips over the edge. Alicia Rivera walked into court afraid everything was about to be taken from her. She walked out with her license intact, her dignity restored, a safety plan in motion, and a new sentence to live by. When help shows up, take it. When your feet are under you again, offer it to somebody else. That sentence traveled from the bench to her home, from her home to her children, from her children to a canned food drive, from a canned food drive to the next person who needed proof that compassion can ripple farther than any fine ever could. And maybe that is the real reason viewers never forgot this case. Because for one unforgettable morning in Providence, justice did more than decide. It noticed. If this story moved you, like this video and hit that subscribe button, because we tell the stories that remind people mercy and accountability can exist in the same room. Share this with someone who has been carrying too much alone. And before you go, drop a comment telling us this. Should judges have more freedom to consider real-life context, or should the law stay strictly the same for everyone no matter the circumstances? Because the next story we're covering might challenge you even more. A father walked into court furious at the world, and one question from the bench exposed a secret he had buried for 20 years. You do not want to miss that one.